A couple days ago, Nikon put out a new firmware update adding grain to photo and video for the Nikon ZF, so we're going to talk about it. What's up? My name's Chris Tejas. I'm a photographer and videographer based in Ontario, Canada. And if you've watched this channel at all, you'll probably know that generally speaking, the way I do reviews is I'll take the piece of gear and I'll use it on a professional shoot so that I have a sense of how it works in the real world and whether it actually makes sense for me to use at a higher level. However, like 4 days ago, I had knee surgery, so I am not taking a lot of shoots right now. I actually am barely walking beyond like my bedroom to here, to the washroom and back and forth and that kind of thing. So we are gonna look at a few photos here and we're just gonna kind of talk about the grain and how I feel about it and why I think it's either a good thing or a bad thing. Let's talk. Setting up is pretty simple. You just go to the setting in your main photography menu and you turn it on, you set it to where you want it and you start shooting. It'll only affect the JPEGs, and something to note is that it will not affect the preview that you get. So if you turn on grain and you look through the viewfinder or the LCD, you're not gonna actually see the grain coming through. You have to look at the JPEG preview afterwards in order to see that. So keep that in mind. If you think like, oh, I'm adding grain, but I'm not seeing anything change, that is why. You can also use grain in video, but you have to be shooting in 8-bit. And I typically shoot in 10-bit 422 with N-Log. So I did take a few clips here to show you, and we'll look at those too. Okay, so looking at this here quickly, we're gonna keep on the left a control. So this one basically has no grain added onto it. And this one here, we are looking at small 1. So if we look into this area here, you can see a good amount of grain being added into there, into those darker areas. If we look into our deep shadows here, you obviously can't see too much because it's super dark, but we do see a little bit of that grain happening. What if we go up here? This is where we've actually set our focus, and you can see that it definitely softens things up a little bit when you use grain. In this part here, we have small 1, and then we're gonna go to medium 1, and then we're gonna go to large 1. The biggest thing you're gonna see is that I think like you see like a tightness or a compactness when you're looking at small 1 versus a blockiness or like a wider amount of grain when you're looking at large 1. So looking at the small 1, paying attention here, you can see where we have a difference between the one with no grain and one with grain. You can see a fair amount of loss in our sharpness. If we go to the medium, you can see that that cuts out even more, and in the large, even more. So the biggest thing we're losing here is sharpness. And that's not the same as grain. And so that's something that I think it's important to keep in mind. If we look at the other extreme, so we'll keep this again as our control here with no grain, and then we will select small 6. You can see all that extra grain actually, because it's introducing all of that noise and that speculation in there, it is actually bringing up our exposure. We didn't change anything here, but it does increase the exposure in the shadows a little bit. So if we zoom in here, this is small number 6. And if we compare that to large number 6, let's look here. So this is large number 6 versus small number 6. You can see the density of the film grain is higher, but it's not necessarily way more. So like you're getting the same volume of grain, I would say, but there's more space in between these. It's not quite as tight, knit, or compact. If we go to medium, let's look at that too. So small at 6, medium at 6, and large at 6. Looking at our area of focus now, if we take a look, we can see that this here is small 6, and you can see we've lost pretty much all definition. It looks more like pointillist painting than anything else. If we go to medium at 6, you can see you lose even more, and large at 6, you lose a little bit more. But again, it's not really that big of a difference. Now looking at the middle road here, if we look in at number 3 here, so this is small 3 versus medium 3 versus large 3. Again, you're just seeing like a slight shift in sharpness and blockiness of the grain. You're not necessarily seeing more or less. I'm just gonna run through all the images now. You're gonna see small to medium to large 1 through 6, and you can just see what they all look like. You can pause as much as you want and pixel peep if you want. Obviously, you're not gonna be able to see it as much on YouTube as you can when I am, doing it here, but it at least gives you a bit of a sense. At a broad level, I like the idea of this. I like the fact that they've implemented in this way where you have small, medium, and large, and you can go from 1 to 6. I think that that's in practice though. I feel like you're probably never gonna wanna use past 2 on any of the settings. I think in small, medium, or large, you can get away with using up to 2, and you might actually add something to it, a little bit of character. You know, you might be able to like soften some of the areas that you want to. And that's actually maybe one of the benefits and drawbacks, because this does reduce the sharpness on the image a fair bit. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're using a super sharp camera and a super sharp lens, like the ZF and maybe one of the S series lenses, maybe you do want to soften it a little bit, and this is kind of a nice organic way to do that. It's cool that the grain pattern is different every single time. It's not like a static overlay. Like, it does change and shift, so it feels a little more natural in that sense. But I do think the implementation from like 3 onward, whether you're at small, medium, or large, is pretty heavy-handed. It also seems to me, from looking at this, that being on small versus being on large, if you were to go to the like biggest spectrum of that, so let's say you're at small 6 and large 6, small 6, I think it feels almost like there's more grain because the grain is tighter and more compact, so there's more of it, so it's like denser. But large 6 is just like, it's way, way, way too much. I don't know when you would use that. I don't know when you would use a lot of these, to be honest. And that's why I say like 1 to 2 is kind of where it's at. That's what I would recommend. So that's that for photo. Now, if we're looking at video, it's a little more simplified. You can only go from 1 to 3. You can't change it between small, medium, and large. It's just 1 to 3 and that's it. I think going past 1, like going to 2 and 3 just introduces way too much grain and it looks really noisy to me. I would only use that if I was like trying to mimic a certain look of a certain older camera where I thought like, okay, well, this Super 8 or this, 16 mil adds a lot of grain in this way, and that's how I want to do it. So I can see an application for that, but baking it right into the file, I think is a big choice. And I'm not sure that I understand where I would use that. Again, using it at setting 1 could be kind of fun, and if anything, it might kind of break up some of those like constant patterns that can give you issues when you are uploading to YouTube. So if you do want to do like 8-bit and put a little bit of that grain in, it might actually solve the problem without having to add grain later. But again, you just don't have that flexibility. So I don't know, for video, it's interesting, it's fun. I like that you can do it. I think you could combine this with some really fun picture controls, like the creative picture stuff that they do, and get something really interesting for photo and video. And that's probably the play for this. But as it stands, I think it still needs some refinement, but it's cool. I'm down. I think it's fun. Why not have it in there? And there was a whole bunch of other good stuff in this firmware update that I really liked, actually, especially for manual focusing. So we'll talk about that next time. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'm going to try and get good enough on my knee that I can go out and take photos so that this can be a little more interesting next time. But thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.